Hey, what's JAMR? This is the second video, guys, I told you I was going to make. I'm going to be focusing on price elasticity of demand. Again, don't feel like you're going to need to know how to calculate it. You won't. Not going to be on an exam. But for the sake of making it easier to explain exactly what elasticity is, I'm going to go over it anyway. I'm going to use the slides that the professor has provided that does have the calculations to make it easier for you guys to wrap your head around. So I'm going to share my screen. Might be a few slides ahead, and I am. So this is where I left off in the last video. Consider how a business traveler would respond to an increase in ticket price or to a change rather in ticket price. It's going to be an increase. For plane tickets between Boston and LA, how responsive would vacationers be to the same increase? How responsive would holiday travelers be to the same increase? Think about the different circumstances surrounding their profession, why they want to travel, when you think about how responsive they would be. Business might have to be there. Vacation might not. In holiday, it depends because they put different value on their destination. Depending on what it is, it's just personal. So I'm going to be going over the calculation for the vacationers. When the price of a round trip to Boston to LA rises from $400 to $500, the quantity of tickets purchased by vacationers decreases from 1,000 to 500. So calculate elasticity. In order to calculate elasticity, you need to determine the percent change, and this is the formula for percent change. I don't know if you guys are going to want to write that down or not. You don't have to. But for the sake of just showing you guys, I'm going to zoom ahead. The quantity demanded percent change, the new minus the old over the old. So 500 minus 1,000 over 1,000 times 100. Get a negative 500 over 1,000. Negative 0.5 times 100 is negative 50%. So the percent change in the quantity demanded is negative 50%. Do the same thing for the price. Price percent change 500 minus 400. New minus old over old. So 500 minus 400 over 400 is going to be 100 over 400 times 100. You guys know where this is going. 1/4 times 100 is just going to end up being 25% change. A 25% change in price. So implemented into the equation, you have elasticity, percent change, quantity demanded, percent change in price. Negative 50% over 25%, you're going to get negative 2. And negative 2, the negative sign is a good indicator, I'm going to say right here, of the way in which it will affect the demand. So if it's a negative elasticity, that more often than not means that it decreased the quantity demanded. So the amount of tickets went down by 500. As soon as you read that, you're going to have a good idea that it's probably not going to be. It's going to be elastic, but in a way that decreases the amount of tickets purchased. So negative 2. Negative means it's probably going to end up going. It's going to be a decrease in the quantity demanded. Go on. So the professor included this as well. The economists in the textbook dropped the negative sign entirely. Most people in the outside world do too, just because they were focused on the absolute value. 2, the distance from 0 is what really matters. And so you can go with either. Either will work, negative 2 or 2. You can put the absolute value pipelines around it, so negative 2 is going to be 2. But don't feel obligated to. Professor Clark will prefer you to leave on the negative sign just because it also makes it easier. I'm going to skip that. For elasticity, what does it mean? If it's elastic, the absolute value of the absolute value of the elasticity calculated will be greater than 1. So if it's more than 1, then the value is going to be elastic. So the negative 2 that we calculated, the absolute value of the 2s we calculated is bigger than 1. So it's going to be fairly responsive to a change in price. It's inelastic if the absolute value is between 0 and 1. So it's not going to be very responsive to a change in price if it's between 0 and 1. And this is close to like the springy and non-springy idea from the bed analogy in the previous video. How do you interpret the value once you get it? So 0, perfectly inelastic. If your elasticity is calculated to be 0, then a change in price will not affect the demand in the slightest. Between negative 1 and 0, it's going to be inelastic, as I said in the previous slide. Relatively large change in price. These are good definitions to write down. A relatively large change in price leads to a small change in demand if it's inelastic. If it's negative 1, the absolute value of the elasticity is equivalent to 1, rather. then it has unit elasticity, which means that for a change in price, the percent change in price will have a direct correlation to percent change in demand. So a 2% increase in price will lead most likely to a corresponding 2% change in demand. So that's what we call the unit elasticity. If it's less than 1, or if it's the absolute value of the elasticity is less than 1 rather. Yeah, that's elastic. Greater than 1, sorry. I was confused. I keep using the negative signs. Maybe I should just use the absolute values. So if the absolute value of the elasticity is greater than 1, then it's elastic. And if it's elastic, it means that a relatively small change in price leads to a large change in demand. So write these down. These are helpful. Now, if it's extremely negative, if the absolute value of E is approaching negative infinity, or if the absolute value of E is approaching infinity, it's perfectly elastic. Any increase in the price leads to no goods being demanded. So, moving on. The elasticity of demand, the elasticity is not the slope. I mentioned this at the beginning. The slope, the numerical value for the slope and the numerical value for elasticity are not the same thing. They're good indicators. If the flatter, it tends to be that the flatter the demand curve is, the more elastic it will be, versus the more vertical the demand curve is, the less elastic it will be. And now if it's completely horizontal, we call that perfectly elastic. And if it's perfectly vertical, it's perfectly inelastic. So perfectly inelastic, then a change in price will in no way affect the change in quantity demanded, and the quantity demanded. And for perfectly elastic horizontal line, a change in price will greatly affect the quantity demanded. And this is what I said earlier. The elasticity of demand is analogous to the substitutability of the good. So this can relate back to the idea of the vacationers, the business people, and the holiday vacationers, looking at the change in price of the ticket from Boston to LA. There are more competing products. If there are more competing products, then they tend to have a more elastic response. Their elasticity would be greater if, say, when the price increased from $400 to $500, the vacationers would most likely not go, which is why they had such a drastic decrease, because they have other options available to them, say a drive into the hills around their house, or like maybe just go camping in the backyard as opposed to taking a vacation to LA. Now we look at specific brands rather than broad categories, and the goods are not the own price elasticity demand is more elastic when there are more competing products. We look at specific brands rather than broad categories. The goods are not necessities, and the consumers spend more time searching, and there's more time to adjust. So any of these factors increase the elasticity of demand. The price elasticity of demand is more elastic when these 5 conditions are met, or even a few of these 5 conditions are met. But price elasticity of supply, I suppose that's it for the price elasticity of demand. I hope you guys find this helpful. Sorry if I stuttered a few times. I'll go over this slide one more time, just because I did trip over my words. The own price elasticity of demand is more elastic when there are more competing products. We look at specific brands rather than broad categories. The goods are not necessities, so you don't need them. Because if they were necessities, why would you be affected by an increase in price? Say that you needed to buy gas because you work 50 miles away. You're not going to buy gas because of the increase in price. You're going to need to get to where you're going, so you're going to buy gas no matter what the price is. Consumers spend more time searching. They have more time to look. They find more opportunities, and there's more time to adjust. For the airfare, somebody purchased a ticket for the $500